There we are, live. Thank you. We're back in the House Judiciary Committee this Friday afternoon, January 10th, continuing to get some introductions, and very happy to have the Department of Public Safety team headed by Commissioner Jennifer Morrison. Thank you so much for being here. Identify yourself for the record and we'll proceed.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Representative Lalonde. My name is Jennifer Morrison. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety.
Great. Excellent. And we have until we have a good block of time for.
Great. So we have a few slides to make sure that everybody is reminded, some folks, it might be the first time they've heard it, but that everybody's reminded that the Department of Public Safety is pretty broad and deep areas of expertise that we bring to you and want to work with you on. Some members of the team are here in person and I will introduce them. And then we have other members of the team who are joining us remotely. And then after I run through the slides, we will have plenty of time for questions. And many of those questions may be directed to either to one of our divisional directors or one of our attorneys, or whoever is the best person to answer it, we'll get to it. So the department, this is an overview. You obviously can't read it very well because it's small boxes, but it shows that the Office of the Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioner, there's a small team of us inside that office, including our legal counsel, our public records section, our executive assistant, our principal assistant, the Office of Policy Development, and then, of course, by statute, the Office of Internal Affairs for the Vermont State Police answers directly to the Commissioner. It goes outside the chain of command of the Vermont State Police and answers to the Commissioner. And then each of the colored boxes below that represents one of our divisions. And I'm going to give you a brief overview. This is total wave tops. There's a lot going on in each of the divisions, and we'll certainly take your questions, or if we get into a subject matter area where we need to go deeper, then we'll come back to that. The Vermont State Police is the largest division within the Department of Public Safety. The director of the Vermont State Police is Matthew Birmingham. His rank is colonel. So if people sometimes get confused between director, colonel, it is one and the same. The largest breakdown of the state police is the Field Force Division, and then the Criminal Division, and then the Support Services Division. We are authorized for approximately 330. We might be down to about 326 that we are authorized for sworn troopers. We have civilianized 12 positions in the last 2 years. We just can't find qualified personnel to hire who make it through all of the training and field training and certification processes. But we have taken a really hard look at every single function and tried to flip positions to be able to be done by people who don't carry a badge and a gun, as long as they can be done to the same level of expertise as somebody who does. So
you tell me, I missed those numbers. How many people are you down?
We are down like vacancies. Yeah. I don't know the exact number right now. We send 17 to pre-basic on Monday. So if I add them to the head count, we are roughly down 45 to 46 troopers.
Even after
adding 17.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Field Force Division, of course, are the folks you see out in the field. They wear uniforms, they drive to marked units. And that also includes all of our special operation programs. We have 14 special teams. Those include things like our explosive bomb squad, basically, for lack of a better word, our underwater recovery team. There are 14 teams that all provide service statewide in very special areas. And then the traffic and recreational safety programs are also part of that. So we obviously have snowmobile and boat patrols and traffic safety units, etc. Inside the criminal division is the Bureau of Criminal Investigations that handles general crimes that require in-depth investigation beyond what a trooper on the road would be able to devote their resources to. It's also the home of the Major Crime Unit, which handles all officer-involved shootings, homicides, and major large crimes. It doesn't necessarily have to be a homicide. Generally it is, but it can be handled by the Major Crime Unit. And they roll out with victim advocates and the crime scene search team, which is one of those 14 specialized teams, and incredible work. The Technology Investigation Unit is a very busy unit. Everything, as you can imagine, today has a nexus to technology. Everybody's device is connecting to a cell tower or a Wi-Fi network or something. There's a lot of digital footprints that we use in criminal investigations. That's also home to the Vermont Intelligence Center and the Homeland Security Unit, as well as the Narcotics Investigation Unit. And then in Support Services Division, we have a fair and impartial policing team, which is a civilian. Dr. Eitan Nasreddin Longo is paired up with a state police sergeant, and together they form our fair and impartial policing team and are engaged with various committees and trainings and stakeholder engagement. Staff operations is a very broad brushstroke for saying things like policy and administration, basically all the not sexy parts of policing. Emergency communications would be both the 911 call takers at our two PSAPs plus dispatching, which are two separate functions, and of course, fleet services. So the Vermont State Police is about 400 when you add the non-sworn and the sworn members together. And again, it's the largest division within DPS. So the Vermont Crime Information Center is another division, and this is sort of this is the info central. Like, this is where if you're trying to become a nurse or you're trying to adopt someone, you have to get a fingerprint supported background check. Not only does the fingerprint part get verified by this unit, but then the search for any related records to ensure that we know who people are, that they are who they say they are, before they're given special access to vulnerable persons or certain privileges. So there's the fingerprint section, the record check section, criminal history section, the sex offender registry, and then there's an audit and training section. We provide support to every criminal justice agency, which is more than every law enforcement agency in the state. So all the law enforcement agencies in the state rely on us to have accurate and timely information, but also the Department of Corrections and many other entities that are designated as criminal justice agencies rely on our information systems. The Radio Technology Services Division, we operate a large land mobile radio infrastructure across the state. And this is how obviously state assets, including the AOT plow drivers and all of AOT and Agency of Natural Resources, and of course, troopers, et cetera, how they talk on portable and handheld radios and maintain contact with dispatch. And there are many other first responder agencies that use portions of our land mobile radio network to augment their own, or perhaps they just need to use a repeater, or they just need to place an antenna on one of our towers. But our network is also integrated into other first responder agencies' communication schemes. So these folks are busy doing not just maintenance and programming of handheld radios and in-car, we call them mobile radios, but they also maintain the 40 towers that are inconveniently for them, but convenient for communications, located on mountaintops. And so in the winter, they take snowmobiles up and they ride ATVs in the off season, and they have to inspect all the infrastructure and the backhaul and like the generator, if that's the type of backup that they have there. And they also manage all of our phone lines within DPS. The rest of the state enterprise is managed on a phone system that ADS handles, but that is not the case because of the 24/7, 365 critical function of phone lines having to operate, particularly into our PSAPs and dispatch centers. So we maintain our own phone network, and they are responsible for that. And they serve as a point of contact for local and county officials on all matters related to land mobile radios. So the Division of Fire Safety is one of those areas that I still, 3 years into this, am still learning things that we do in fire safety. We handle plumbing and electrical licensing. So if you want to become a plumber or a master plumber or electrician, that is all done through our office. We enforce building codes. The Deputy Director, Landon Wheeler, is joining us here today. Executive Director Mike Rocher could not be here. Also within fire safety, we run the Vermont Fire Academy, which provides support, training, and certification to career and volunteer firefighters throughout the state. And our special teams include our hazmat team and our urban search and rescue team, both of which are available 24/7, 365 to every community in the state. You saw Hazmat here yesterday during the inauguration. They were all over checking to make sure that there's no, bad stuff in the building. And I'm sure you're familiar with one component of our urban search and rescue team, which is our swift water teams that have heroically saved hundreds of lives in the last 2 summers floodings. That is one portion of what the urban search and rescue team does. They also do structural collapse and various other components that relate to stabilizing structures, finding and rescuing people inside an urban area or in swift water space. Ropes, technical ropes situations and all that stuff. And then they also have a fire investigation unit, which works hand in glove with the state police fire investigation unit, where they determine cause and origin of fires and investigate alongside law enforcement. And in those cases where criminal charges are filed, state police file those, but they work together as a joint team. And of course, we have a public education arm within fire safety. If you ride in an elevator and you don't see my name on it, you should probably get out of that elevator because I've been commissioner long enough now that if my signature is not on it, I did not inspect it personally, but it means it hasn't been inspected in probably 3 years. So you might want to take the steps. Another one of our divisions is
Question about this one.
Do you do escalators also?
we do not do escalators. Landon, we do not do escalators, right? I see him on my screen.
Currently at this time, that is not covered under our elevator rules. In our next edition, that will be something that will be captured.
How many escalators are there in this?
Well, that's the question.
There are 4.
If that question comes up,
How many are there?
4. There's 4 in the state of Vermont.
Four.
it's actually, but I just heard North Shore Books has one, and that was not on my radar.
Really?
Anyway,
Okay, 4.
We digress.
No, that's okay. And we'll
Sorry.
no, it's okay, ma'am. We'll have plenty of time for questions.
it's
That's a great
just,
question.
yeah, when you said elevators, I was like, that is really interesting. I had no idea you did that.
Yes, it is very interesting. There are many mysteries buried in the depths.
Yeah.
It's become a little bit of the place where things get put in state government, like, oh, energy efficiency, let's put it in fire safety, let's, code compliance for rental housing, let's put it there. So
Some things we can send your way.
super, as long as there's appropriate resources attached, we are up for the job. Money and
That's
people.
up to your boss's budget.
Understood. Vermont Emergency Management is remarkably a smaller division within the Department of Public Safety. However, their impact is really outsized. The 5 sections are engagement, which is engaging with the local planning commissions, the regional planning commissions, local partners and stakeholders, trying to make sure all those relationships are built before, left of boom, before a disaster, right? And then there's the operations and logistics section. Part of that is we operate a 24/7, 365 watch officer program. So anybody from the critical infrastructure space or a law enforcement or public health space can call the watch officer to report a problem that may require extra resources beyond what they have on hand. And then we swing into action to address that. The other 3 sections are planning. Of course, there's a ton of planning and plan writing and reviewing, exercising, practicing before the game. And then our recovery section and mitigation section used to be together. They have recently been separated because they are very distinct types of work, particularly when we talk about mitigating the next disaster as opposed to recovering from a disaster. I don't think we really understood how different they were until we had 2 summers in a row of catastrophic flooding and the same 3 people were tasked with both jobs, and it really was not sustainable. So they're now separate sections within the Division of Emergency Management. And that is also a division that has tentacles into a lot of things that continue to surprise me and delight me. They are a really committed, amazing group of people, and it is a small but mighty team. So the folks that keep us running and they really do keep all of this going is administration and finance. Obviously, we have an accounting office, a budget office. I'm going to come back to grant management. audit and payroll office, and the procurement office. And the grant management office handles such a volume of grants. It is staggering. We manage 31 federal grant programs through any type of alphabet soup within the federal government, whether that's FEMA, DOJ, Bureau of Justice Assistance, et cetera. And during the state fiscal year 24, we dispersed $114 million and $95 million in disaster grant funding alone. So we are the pass-through for many other entities in state government, but also sometimes for local communities or nonprofits when we have our cybersecurity grants or our homeland security for nonprofits. Like we become the recipient of the money, and then we pass that through to successful applicants. This is an incredible amount of work by a relatively small team. So that's one of our divisions as well. And then we have the Vermont Forensic Laboratory headed by Dr. Tricia Conti. They are a accredited full-service forensic laboratory. Anything that they can't handle, they are the only forensic lab in the state. Anything they can't handle, we send off to either private labs or to the federal government's labs if it's something beyond our capability. The different sections are chemistry, such as clandestine lab work or analyzing seized drugs to determine what they are or how many drugs are in there, because it's never just one thing anymore. The biology section, which deals with sexual assault kits, the forensic nurse examiner program. Obviously, they deal with any blood or bodily fluid evidence collected at a scene. And the toxicology section works with allegations of driving under the influence or driving under the influence of drugs. And they also run the DRE program, which is a program that certifies drug recognition experts to be human breathalyzers, so to speak, to pick up forensic clues of people who are using drugs other than alcohol for which we have no test. And then there's the physical comparison section, which deals with fingerprints and tool marks and firearms and all the things that are physical and tangible that you might collect at a crime scene. And then our last division is the Division of Animal Welfare. That was established in statute last session. We have had an incredible process hiring a director. We had over 30 applicants. There was a tremendous amount of interest from all over the country. We were shocked and delighted with how much interest. We have narrowed it down to less than a handful of finalists, and we are expecting to make a conditional offer of employment, which would be subject to a background investigation and various other things before we make a final offer. But we're looking forward to having a finalist in the next 72 hours or so. So, but that just means that would be the person that we advance to background. It doesn't mean they'll get hired. But yeah, the interest has been incredible. We've had people who are veterinarians, who are attorneys, who are lifetime animal welfare advocates who have said, I want to do this. I want to build this with you from scratch. So that's been exciting to see. And that's the end of our presentation. I'm going to stop sharing and do introductions of my team because I failed to do that in the beginning. In the room with me is Wilda White, who is a consultant for policy and training. She's been working with us since I was the deputy commissioner, so many years. And she may be part of the team that speaks to you on issues, as are everybody in this room. Deputy Commissioner Dan Batesy and Tucker Jones is our Associate General Counsel, and Mandy Wooster is our Executive Director of Policy Development. So this, the five of us plus Rosemary Gretkowski, who is our General Counsel, we are the bulk of the policy team, and it would be, you might see other people if it's something specific to fire safety or specific to VCIC, but from the leadership team of DPS, that's the policy team. And then I see that Landon is on the line. And Landon, do you want to say hello? All right. He is the Deputy Director of Fire Safety. And Matt Birmingham. Matt, can you show everyone your smiling face? There's Colonel Birmingham.
Hello, everybody. I apologize. I'm not there. I'm out on the road, as you can see.
Yes, thank you, Matt. And Karen Carr is with us as well. Karen is our administrative assistant, and she handles all of the scheduling for any testimony requests that you might have. She also knows who's supposed to be doing what. You know, she's sort of the contact person. Should be your first line of defense if you're looking to get information.
If we're
From one of
supposed to
us?
know what we're doing.
Yeah, she'll tell you what you're supposed to be doing too. It's not a problem. Right. And we also have a deep bench in this area that if somebody's off, whether they're out sick or they're on vacation, Heather McLaughlin is our principal assistant and she is coming up to speed. She just joined us late last fall and she's coming up to speed to be able to pitch in when Karen's busy and Mandy can serve as the backstop. And there's also a woman from the criminal division named Chelsea Delphi, I believe is her name, Delphia, who can also serve as a backstop. So we have multiple points of contact, but if it goes through Karen, and if for some reason you ever got a bounce back, you can hit up Heather or Mandy and you'll get to the right person. Let me see who else is on from our team. I think that might be it. I didn't bring all the directors because I don't think this committee intersects much with the rest. You might intersect with VCIC. That would be the one that you might talk with Director Wallen quite a bit.
Yeah, and we've had Dr. Conti in here as well.
Okay.
And I don't know that we have anything that we
Pending.
know of yet pending that we would have.
Okay. So now you can ask us anything you want to ask us.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Capitol Police, does that fall under your jurisdiction?
Just not.
It's not, okay.
It falls under the Sergeant at Arms.
Sergeant Arms, okay.
So, and they are certified by the Vermont Criminal Justice Council, which means they have statewide authority, as do every certified law enforcement officer, but their area of responsibility ends at the curtilage of this building.
Okay.
And I know that has been a topic of discussion over the years.
Thank you.
Can you, go ahead, Tom.
I know this would probably fall more under the government operations side of the house, but I'm personally curious about the wish list or where you might feel deficiencies within, your umbrella. One thing that jumps to mind, I've heard a lot about is good things about the USAR group and funding and things like that and your stance maybe what we need to do there. Is there anything?
Coming out firing.
No, I.
No, I know. I appreciate the
They've
question.
been, with the last few years, it's been.
I know. They are a priceless asset to Vermonters. And if we didn't know it before, we certainly know it after the last 2 years and the number of lives saved and the number of evacuations of animals and people that they executed. In fact, Mike Cannon, who is the team captain, so to speak, of the urban search and rescue team, he's the only full-time employee of the unit. And his position we have been paying for with various grant streams. It is not general funded. I can't get ahead of my boss and say that it should be or shouldn't be. I'm just telling you that the current landscape for funding for USAR is pretty much coming out of grant funding. Last year, I believe it was, we got a one-time $500,000 general fund infusion from in the budget, which was not part of the governor's recommend. So I can't, what can I say? That there's a budget and there are other streams that we have successfully used over the years to stay ahead of I shouldn't say stay ahead, to meet the need. There are needs that we don't necessarily have funding streams for.
Are there any plans of utilizing maybe other groups or other things under your umbrella to help? Maybe USAR better themselves and they help somebody else or?
So they already have that relationship with the hazmat team. So for many years, we used a special fund through the hazmat team to pay for expenses for USAR. But we had to stop because hazmat ran out of money to fund their own basic necessities. So there's already a tremendous support between those two special teams within fire safety. The urban search and rescue team is made up of approximately 90 individuals from all over the state who are considered part-time employees, but they all have day jobs. So they're all involved in something as their day job. And when they get activated for training or for a response or to go into, a standby mode, they're sitting in their rigs at places where we've pre-positioned them, then they get paid. But they don't get paid other than when they're actually working under our direction. So it's part-time people that all come together under one director, and they do amazing work, not just here in Vermont, but as you know, they responded to Florida. And after 5 days, they working and making rescues along the Gulf Coast, they were repositioned to just outside of Asheville, North Carolina last fall, where they did grueling work recovering bodies all from one town. So, yeah, it's a great team. They're a beautiful asset.
I guess it boils down to my concern for readiness, and that's.
We share your concern for readiness. And certainly the biggest priority we have is to make sure that team is ready to go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there are a number of impediments to that that we face on a daily basis.
Thank you.
A lot of their equipment was surplus or end of life for other state agencies. And so having new and modern equipment to roll out with, and then to be able to get back from North Carolina without it breaking down is important.
Sure.
As is a place to store the vehicles and the boats and the engines and all the stuff that goes with special teams like that. So,
Sorry for it so much.
no, we can talk offline about it. I can't get
I
ahead
don't
of the
really have that
governor's
much.
budget.
I'm interested. I've heard a lot about it. And
Well, thank you for your interest. They are a vital part of keeping Vermonters safe.
And then Barbara.
So I got, if you don't mind, I'll throw down what I got. The radio technology that we have, wasn't there a couple, like the state police just got one, and then some of the individual towns subcontract, right?
I don't believe we have any subcontracting arrangements. So the state police operates a large statewide land mobile radio network. And then there are many communities, Burlington and Colchester, where I was the police chief in both, have their own infrastructure that they maintain through contracts with vendors like Radio North or Burlington Communications, or you name the group, right? So there are many communities that pay for their own land mobile radio assets so that they can talk on their radios and be heard by whoever's dispatching for them. And sometimes parts of our network are part of their scheme because these schemes are big and the topography in Vermont demands that there be a lot of ways to get those signals around the hilltops, right? So it is a bit of a patchwork across the state of who owns what, who leases space on whose towers, who has contracts with whom to use these assets.
Yeah. So that's still out there okay.
Yes, so Public Safety Communications Task Force, which was formed under Act 78, the big bill in 2023. We have been doing our work for about almost a year and a half now, and we are coming close to delivering a first draft of recommendations for what the future statewide communications ecosystem might look like. We expect to have a draft for stakeholders, folks who work in the field, for the legislature by the first week of February. And then it will be a draft with an intentional period for feedback before we finalize that report.
How many full-time people do we have at DPS?
We have 605 last I knew full-time positions and almost 200, which includes those 90 part-time through USAR plus another 110 part-time employees. So we have 805 employees.
How many do we need? More. Okay, you can get
We're
back.
doing great, thanks.
You have the positions, just not the people.
It's only the troopers positions that we can't hire. To answer your question, how many we need depends on how much you want us to do. And at the end of the day, when we get asked, we continue to get new responsibilities sent our way. I suspect it's performance punishment because we're pretty good at finishing what we start. But sometimes things have to be retriaged and then somebody's unhappy because their priority didn't get attended to. So the how many we need depends on what is a reasonable scope of work to expect us to attend to.
Flowing down the same river. Equipment, how outdated are we? The computers, like everything, we many years behind.
Well, our land mobile radios, not our land mobile radios, our mobile and handheld radios that the state troopers are carrying are nearing end of life. And
Which is how long?
10 to 15 to 20 years, depending on how technology changes and what type of hardware you bought in the first place. So we are going to be in a position of requiring several millions of dollars to replace our in-car radios and our handheld radios. So that is definitely a big technology piece that we know is already out there. When we talk about our computers, I'm not aware that we have a big deficit. We have what we call technical debt inside the agency as we, over the years, morphed from having our own IT team to then having the DII, the division of, the IT team that was the precursor to the Agency of Digital Services. Over the years, things have morphed in how we are supported, and we have become aware that some of our technical systems need updating, and they need to be more secure, and they need to be more modern, and we are building a plan to address that.
So DPS is running off from one computer system in their cruisers and all that stuff, right? Wasn't there two? It's not Velcro.
It is Valcor.
Valcor. Okay.
That's an information management system, but there are many systems that if this is my in-car computer,
Yeah.
I have many programs on here that I can access. I could access Valcor, which is an information system, and it's how you type in information about the people you encountered and what happened, and such. But I could also access my WatchGuard video footage from inside the cruiser. I can access query systems that might query I can access the internet from inside my car. So there's not just one information system. We have dozens of information systems, and within each division, they have their own databases and types of information systems that they rely on. Obviously, in the Division of Fire Safety, no other division can access their databases because theirs is specific to permitting, inspections, and licensing of tradespeople. And those are all things that live within their division, not across the enterprise.
Okay. Last one. Chris Herrick went into a different position, basically with DMV, but I assume that's still under your control, right? Or
No.
what am I missing?
No and no.
Okay.
He left Fish and Wildlife and went over to the Agency of Transportation as I know his title. I was told his title. My understanding, which of course needs to be fact checked with AOT, is that he's working a little bit in the Homeland Security space relative to transportation critical infrastructure. So I anticipate that he will be working closely with our intelligence teams and our Homeland Security teams, because transportation is one of the 16 sectors of critical infrastructure that we need to be monitoring.
So let me get just a little more specific. The trucks that are on the road, and maybe there's some SUVs or something like that. That's the area that is in that you're still in control of, right?
No.
That's all AOT.
That's all AOT within the Department of Motor Vehicles. So the Department of Motor Vehicles has Commercial Vehicle Enforcement Unit, which are the marked units and the uniformed officers. You might see them at way stations. You might see them sitting on the highway running traffic and helping us with highway safety out in that regard. They might respond to in-progress crimes if they're nearby. And then they have a plainclothes unit. I think they call it the inspections unit. that are investigators. They are law enforcement officers who investigate things like maybe there's a service station that's fabricating their inspection stickers or perpetrating some sort of fraud, or there's individuals in the community that are making up titles or spinning back their odometers or things like that. Those are the types of things that they might investigate. But those law enforcement officers do not answer to me.
Okay, thank you
You're welcome.
very much.
So I have a few, but I think they're quickish questions.
Okay.
Given all the recovery rescue that you do, is your department eligible for any of the flood recovery money?
Yes. Yes. A lot of our, when our, it's complicated and I'm going to get over my skis really fast, but if we roll out our swift water teams and other resources within either VEM or DPS more broadly, we roll them out because we think they might be needed. If the disaster that happened as we were preparing for it rises to the level of being declared as a disaster where public assistance is triggered, then we can recoup costs of those deployments. But if it's a small disaster and FEMA does not recognize it as a disaster, we eat the cost of deploying those resources.
Okay. So do those costs include, if you're getting new equipment, some of the depreciation cost of purchasing new equipment? Like, is that a way to help?
That might be a detail that I'm not
Okay,
able
I'm just
to.
trying to think of ways to help get you the equipment with funding that might legitimately be available, but.
Yeah, so the FEMA funding for public assistance would not enable us to purchase new boats, new motors, new trucks, trailers, or anything like that.
But it might cover some of depreciation. I don't know.
I don't know. I'm sure our team knows. I just don't know.
Okay.
No.
And I would add that we leverage a lot
Yeah,
of
good,
grant
okay.
money and federal funding to do the things that we do in a lot over a number of different areas
Awesome.
and specific grant programs. And I know that they've leveraged every drop from that
Good,
lemon that
good.
we're squeezing.
I love doing that, yeah.
Yeah, and they are very creative and very efficient when it comes to that angle.
Are your, just a quick question. Are any of your staff using license plate waivers?
No. Although I will take the opportunity, since you opened the door, to say that they are an incredibly useful tool when managed properly. And I think that the state of Vermont is absolutely missing an opportunity to solve a lot of crimes that are solved around the country with the assistance of license plate readers with a proper policy framework around them and privacy framework.
So I'm a little, one thing when we were talking about Dr. Conti's lab, and how does that intersect with the state epidemiologist? I was thinking about avian flu and testing. Like, do we have the capacity here to?
Yeah, so a different purpose. The lab with the health department is very specifically geared towards the biological testing, the COVID and things like that. Ours is a forensic outlet designed to do things that we talked about here. There is typically not a lot of overlap in those two lanes, but I guess theoretically the potential is there.
And there's separate physical structures in separate communities.
Is there anything we as the legislature can do to help you be able to entice and attract hiring state police?
Yes, you can. We can change. Yes, you can. We can change the narrative that has been pervasive in this building and beyond for the last 4 years, that policing is no longer an honorable profession. Colonel, I'm going to let you chime in here too when I get off my soapbox. We can send the message to our communities that this is a moment of service, and that sometimes, being part of the team that is there for Vermonters in their worst hour is a noble profession. It's not about money anymore. It was at one time back in the day. The money just wasn't sufficient for the work that we were asking, the hours and the nights, weekends, holidays. It is firmly across the country and absolutely in Vermont about the narrative that has been perpetuated that the cops are the bad guys. And it is an unacceptable narrative. It has never been true. And certainly in Vermont, that narrative was not true but we have been swept along in the tides of national social justice and special interest group moments. And we did not stand up and say, that's not our experience in Vermont. And so we have created a situation where it is unattractive for young people to get into this profession. And be very clear, we don't have enough young people in Vermont to fill all the jobs. So would you want to come answer calls 24/7, 365 in the middle of birthdays and holidays? Or would you rather work a desk job 9 to 5 that pays relatively the same?
So,
No, go ahead. We've
Okay.
got to wrap up pretty quickly.
so I know one question that came up at one of the Burlington safety forums was that Burlington is also obviously, like other police departments, having a hard time hiring. And the question got asked about like, could there be sort of joint efforts, and maybe the joint efforts are changing the culture and narrative, but are there ways to jointly work to use resources to help the law enforcement position?
I have a lot of experience with the city of Burlington, as you might know. The state police perform a very different function than municipal police. And in fact, I don't think I appreciated how different it was until I became the commissioner. The local communities need municipal policing. And if it can't be municipal, perhaps it's countywide. They need a closer to community service than what the state police can offer. We cover 80% of the geography and 50% of the people with very few patrol resources. So we are not able to engage in the deeper community policing that would be required. But let me say that we will take any opportunity to work with any community, and we have. There have been several over the last 3 years who have come to us and said, we can't staff a midnight shift, we can't staff a whatever shift. And if they go through a process of sort of shrinking some of their optional services, we have taken on response to their violent crimes and crimes that can't wait until they can get their feet back up under them. So we're always willing to collaborate, but we can't be the answer.
Yeah,
for
but just
every
in terms of
community.
I'm just thinking, like, again, a constituent asked about, like, could there be joint recruitment efforts? And I realize they're very different types of positions.
Yeah, I think that's a very real question, and we can come back to it another time. But the issue is right now we're all fishing in the same small pond.
Right.
And we're all fighting for the same resources, and it's not helpful, candidly. So we need to find a way to expand the pool and more closely align the benefits, et cetera. So there's not people always looking for the next best collective bargaining agreement.
So before I let Coach have the last question, I'm going to push back a little bit on earlier. I think that this committee, particularly the last 2 years, has been trying to change the narrative, has tabled things that seem to be anti-police, qualified immunity, getting rid of that, some other things. And we've tried to be very positive towards our law enforcement, because we recognize law enforcement being a critical component that we've learned as far as for deterrence, and that's the risk of being caught, and that's the presence of law enforcement. And we've worked very closely with law enforcement on the use of force policy to make sure that we are aligned
Yes.
with you. So
Very hard on that.
pushing back a little bit.
Yeah, I welcome that. I welcome that. And when she asked the question, I didn't mean this committee specifically. I took it as the body, the legislature. And that's what I meant. Right. No, agreed. We've had a great working relationship going back to when I first joined DPS, working on the use of force policy. But I will say qualified immunity was that was a tremendous amount of work to put that to the side. And it was indicative of an environment that is frequently being operated in based on feelings, not on facts. And I think that when you ask, what can you do? Let's talk facts in this committee. Let's make decisions based on facts.
When we put that one to rest in here, we made very clear, because I recall making a statement that we had not seen any evidence that this was a significant issue in Vermont. And we did task somebody to look more further into that particular issue. So yeah, we obviously want to have the best law enforcement. And you've worked very well with us and with the Vermont Criminal Justice Council. Thank you to do that. So, and we want to support you all. So, but anyway, yeah, Coach. Yeah.
Hi, Commissioner, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Mine's brief. It's around, emergency management. And, I know we've done a lot of work, with our existing civil defense, properties around or designated areas around the state. Do we keep a pretty accurate, accounting of where we are? I've noticed some communities have really leaned into the federal funds that have been available to upgrade, their facilities so that they're really available to you when you need them. Where's that connection? Or
When you say civil defense, are you talking about the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, or are you talking about our military?
no, the actual facilities, let's say during floods,
Yes.
when we had to activate, those facilities for, community use. Shelter.
Shelters, et cetera. Those situations have been, there is not a universal scheme under which we can just flip buildings to our use or our designated use. There is frequently a pushback from local communities if they don't like the proposed use of the building in their community, where they will throw up some permitting barriers, depending on how they feel about what we're proposing to use the building for. Generally speaking, we've been able to overcome those through collaboration and working with the local communities to repurpose buildings. In an emergency, when we are in the response to an emergency, we can use whatever facility we want for an imminent need. If there's anything that is a state asset, we don't even have to say, hey, I'm taking over your building. They just throw the doors open, like we're all in together if it's a state-owned asset. But in terms of more of the long-term sheltering, housing, and other purposing of state assets, we're doing it as needed. It could be smoother because there are sometimes local barriers to us doing that.
I just add two
Just
small.
identify yourself for the record.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm getting back into this chairing thing and I forgot to have you do that earlier, but when you speak, go ahead.
Dan Basie, Deputy Commissioner. Just two quick clarifications. One, please remember that in an emergency, in a disaster, that local shelter is a function of the local municipality, the local town. And although we work very aggressively with them to help them plan, to help them organize, to help them be ready, not every town is made up the same way, and the infrastructure that's available is not always the same from one town to the other. Second piece is when it does get to the higher level, it is not a function of public safety, it's a function of the agency of human services to do that. Although we work hand in hand, they are absolutely part of our team and part of our planning, but it does shift over to their responsibility.
It's executed through the Emergency Operations Center, but it's carried out by the Agency of Human Services. So people frequently get DPS and AHS mixed up in that regard. But at the end of the day, you shouldn't have to sort that out. We get the job done through the State Emergency Operations Center, regardless of what piece of the state enterprise has to carry it out.
Thank you, but before
Thank
we
you.
go, just a couple things. I didn't hear about your priorities for the administration and public safety. I assume that we will hear that at some point, but also just flagging for you, next week, we're going to be having a couple of days of education on juvenile justice. But the following week, probably the 21st, 22nd, we're going to be taking up Raise the Age. We'll probably have you or your designee in to testify on that issue. And on the 23rd, we're going to have a joint hearing with the Senate Judiciary on public safety, and would like you in like you were in last year, kicking us off with what the trends are that you're seeing.
Very
I
good.
want to flag that for you.
We'll look forward to that. And I'm sure we'll be spending a lot of time together.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, Attorney General Clark, for the delay, but as soon as we clear out some space, we'll
Right.
Nice.
Sorry for smashing you guys.
No, it's
Oh,
fine. We're just pushing stuff.
Oh, please.
It's this way.
Yeah.
No.
There's more information on these trying to talk to you. But it goes. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Attorney General Clark, for being here and introductions. And if you could just kind of introduce Attorney General's office a little bit for, we have 3 new people here, and we could always get reminded of all the good things you all are doing across the way. And if there are any particular priorities that you want to just highlight at a very high level that you want us to. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's so nice to be in this committee again, and welcome to the new people. Or is it you 3? Yeah. Okay, you're all on one side. Well, I know one of you anyway, but it's good to see you here. And one of the things that I like to joke about when I'm running for office is how no one knows what the Attorney General does, but they're too shy to ask. So you have a front row seat. I will tell you what the Attorney General does. The Attorney General is the lawyer to the state, and that takes several different forms. So we have 150 people working in our office, about 100 lawyers, and we represent various parts of the administration. And then we also have our own kind of purview where the Attorney General has the authority to basically sue people and settle cases. Only the Attorney General can bring lawsuits on behalf of the state. Only the Attorney General can decide to settle a case. So that's the authority that comes to the Attorney General. A little background about me, I forgot to say, I have been Attorney General for 2 years. I just was reelected, sworn in yesterday. If you were there, which you probably were, you saw me. And before that, I worked in the Attorney General's office as the Chief of Staff, and also before that as an Assistant Attorney General. I just passed my 10-year mark of being in the Attorney General's office. I worked in private practice before that. And before I went to law school, I worked in the governor's office, and one of my jobs was to come here to the State House and do work relating to a variety of topics that were assigned to me. They had a different structure back then. This was under Governor Dean. So the legislature I really enjoy coming over here, and I love the process. I have so much respect and admiration for all the work that you do. And sometimes people will say, like, Charity, after you're done being Attorney General, like, what's next for you? And they have like grand plans. And I was like, well, maybe, but what sounds like a really fun job is being in the House. So please revel in it for those of us who don't have the good fortune of doing your job. But that's a little bit about me. Which is a long way of saying by statute, I serve the legislature and support you. But you are near and dear to my heart. And I love coming over here and being a part of the ecosystem of the State House. So we have 5 divisions, and I'll just touch on each one. So the civil division is when the state is sued, we defend. It runs the gamut, let me tell you. But when the state is sued, we defend. And those are civil defense attorneys. Civil versus criminal, you probably already learned, but civil is really about money. Criminal is about, justice. The environmental and public protection division has a lot of units that are related to public protection, but are very different. The environmental unit is there. They support the Agency of Natural Resources. Agency of Natural Resources has a complicated case. They'll send it to us. And we also bring our own cases that the Attorney General decides to bring. We also have the Civil Rights Unit, has a very broad name, but actually what they do is employment discrimination, basically. And the 2 lawyers who work in that unit are incredibly knowledgeable about a ton of other civil rights issues, and you will hear from them from time to time, Emily Adams and Julio Thompson. But most of the actual cases and work that we do relate to employment discrimination. We also have the Consumer Unit, which is a very important unit. They are larger than many, and also are the home to a lot of the big cases, the big sexy cases that you read about in the newspaper. So the tobacco settlement, that was a consumer case. We don't come here with a lot of consumer stuff because it goes down the hall to economic development, but a lot of the cases, social media, that was a consumer case. And connected to the consumer unit is the Consumer Assistance Program. I'm going to especially highlight this for you 3. The Consumer Assistance Program is a partnership between my office and the University of Vermont. It's located at the University of Vermont. They have a hotline, like a 1-800 number. And they take thousands of calls and emails and a year. They deal with scams and consumer concerns, but they like 30%, I'm making that up number up, but like a surprising percentage of the work that they do actually is referrals to other places, federal government, municipal, Vermont legal aid, some other place in the state. So if you ever have a constituent with a problem and you don't know where to send them, just contact the Consumer Assistance Program, or you could contact me and I'll send you to the right person to just say, I don't know where to send this person. Do you guys have any ideas? They're the constituent arm. Barbara Richardson's nodding. I love
They're
it.
great.
They are great.
Saying up good stuff.
Thank you. They're really wonderful. And they have, the best thing is every state has something like the Consumer Assistance Program, but only Vermont is cool enough to have it located at a university. And it's literally university students who are involved. They answer the phones, they are handling emails, they take a whole class. And we sort of train them to be like consumer warriors in the world. And it's really, really fun. I used to work there, so I could go on and on, but I know that you're short on time, so I will cut myself short. The next unit I'll talk about is human services. That is where we have that's probably our biggest unit. We have lawyers who are embedded within the Agency of Human Services. They're a DCF handling cases. Mostly these are cases that are in court. They're not transactional work. They're actually in court. Corrections, we have little lawyers kind of all over. You might be asking yourself, well, hang on, some of these places actually have their own lawyers. So why do we have an assistant attorney general? All of our lawyers are called assistant attorney generals, except for me and the deputy attorney general, I think. Well, the reason why is because the assistant attorney general is focused on really court work, raw legal work. A general counsel who might not be a part of my office, but instead a part of that department or agency is focused more on policy. You'll see them testifying. Our AAGs sometimes testify, but it's not that, on behalf of the administration, but not quite as common. So that's the division. It's sort of squishy, but just because I'm sure you would have that question in your travels. The next one is criminal division. We are in this room the most to talk about criminal issues. So we have, have you heard from the state's attorneys? Okay, so we have concurrent jurisdiction with the state's attorneys, but ours is statewide and theirs is restricted by their geographic location. We, in addition, because we're the public, the elected on a statewide level and kind of the figurehead, we also provide a lot of support to this committee and other committees in the legislature. And we serve on a lot of commissions and boards and provide that kind of support and perspective. In addition, our criminal division has the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, ICAC. ICAC deals with what's called child sexual abuse material, or CSAM. Child sexual abuse material is formerly known as child pornography. And they're law enforcement. It's a law enforcement agency in our office. We have several investigators. Our criminal division does the legal work. We also have 2 dogs who can smell the off-gassing of electronic storage equipment. So if someone has evidence, they have child sexual abuse material, they've stored it on a thumb drive, for example, and they've hidden the thumb drive. Humans cannot find the thumb drive, but they have reason to believe it exists and they have a warrant. We will bring in one of the dogs and the dogs can smell out the device. It's really remarkable. You should Google it. We've definitely, there's been interest in it by the media. So there's good material that explain that. And then because it's a statewide purview, the Attorney General's kind of vision for the division rules. And so we have prioritized under my tenure, violent crimes, the most violent crimes, and child sexual abuse. So we are focused on murders, attempted murders, sexual assaults. So that's the criminal division. And I'm going to move on to the General Counsel and Administrative Law Division. General Counsel, Administrative Law. That is kind of a grab bag of various, it's not just administrative because we do a lot of court work there as well. There's different divisions supporting a variety of agencies of transportation, the Department of Taxes. We also support the Medical Practice Board and a few other boards, liquor and lottery. And important for this committee is the Community Justice Unit is there. And that relates to criminal work because the community justice unit basically oversees the restorative justice work that's done statewide. We oversee the grants. We work with various nonprofits who are located in their communities who are best positioned to deliver the services of restorative justice. And if you haven't learned a lot about restorative justice yet, I highly recommend learning more because it's a fascinating subject. I could give you like a bibliography of resources that I wasn't a criminal practitioner before I came to the Attorney General's office, and it's been just such a wonderful opportunity to learn about all kinds of things. We have right now 20% of misdemeanors, for example, in Vermont, are put through a restorative justice program. One of the ones that we oversee in our office. 20% is pretty high, and I think a lot of people don't even realize that it exists. The person who oversees that in our office is named Willa Farrell. Willa is wonderful. Literally everyone can tell you that. She's absolutely wonderful. I'm sure you will see her. She just brings a lot of years of experience and incredible care to the work that she does. And I also will say the restorative justice centers, who are those located throughout Vermont, they'll be here from time to time. They'll likely have a breakfast or something, and I highly recommend going and meeting them, especially getting in touch. And I would encourage you to get in touch with the one in your own community because they know all the dirt that's going on in the town, and they're just wonderful people. So that's embedded there, and you might be interfacing with them from time to time. Also, there is critically the appellate unit. Here in Vermont, we only have 2 layers of courts. So there's the trial courts, they're called superior courts. And then we have the appellate court, it's called the Vermont Supreme Court. It's right next door. So our appellate unit handles cases that are on appeal, and sometimes they're going to the Vermont Supreme Court. Sometimes they're, in a federal branch. So they're going through a different system. And also just, the moment that we are in time, we anticipate that our next president will have a repeat of his approach during his first term, which unfortunately involved creating policies that violated law and the Constitution. During the last Trump administration, our office sued 62 times, and I think we prevailed 60 times. So the appellate unit will be leading on any of that work that should come to pass if we should have a repeat of what happened in 2017. At the end of the overview of the Attorney General's office is who the team is. So Todd Delos is, thank you. Todd Delos is the Director of Policy and Legislation for the office. So you'll be seeing a lot of him. If for those of you who've been around a while, Todd basically has my old job because when I left to run for office, you guys were like leaving that week. And then no, we didn't really need me that much. And then I came back in January. So I kind of kept doing that work. And I was like, this is too much. So thank goodness Todd is here. And so you'll be seeing a lot of him. And Todd was actually in the office when I arrived in 2014. So I was very excited to steal him back. I wanted to talk a little bit about your legislative counsel and the relationship between our office and your leg counsel. So I just told you I was a lawyer to the state. Well, you're the state too, right? So how does that work? Your lawyer is legislative counsel, but we can offer subject matter expertise on things, consumer law being a classic example. No one knows consumer law like the Attorney General's office, but there's many, many topics like that. We also will collaborate with Leg Counsel on a lot. So if you have an issue or a bill that you think you want us to get involved with, you can just give us sort of permission to get in touch with Leg Counsel or us so we can have a conversation. And it's sort of a force multiplier to have the different perspectives. So we work really well and very closely with Leg Counsel. We have a great relationship with Leg Counsel. And a few issues that kind of come to mind that you're going to see, you might hear about us and see us would be, we frequently have come in with legislation that has been, you all want to pass and someone is saying, no, you can't, that's unconstitutional. So we'll come in and kind of give you our opinion about that. We come in on anything criminal related, especially sealings and expungement, should that make its way back to you someday.
So we're going to have a curse jar in here that if you say expungement or sealing before we have a bill from the Senate, but we're giving everybody one shot.
They did this morning.
Exhaust. Yeah, so, yeah. May make some money.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, you have a pizza party at the end of the session. Oh my gosh, okay, good.
Smile.
You're fully supportive, as you know.
I do.
Don't worry
I
about
do.
it. We're waiting.
I'll come to the pizza party. I'll buy the beer for the pizza break. We also, 2001, something somewhere around there, the legislature created what's called the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission. So Domestic Violence Fatality Review, they're looking at the murders related to, or other fatalities, but usually it's murder, related to domestic violence. They reflect on it, they provide recommendations, and they send their like, how can we do better? Like, what can we change that will keep people safe? And then that is submitted to you all, to the governor, to the judiciary, and it's every other year by statute. They come up with one every year, because why not? They do the review. But we make a big splash about it when we are statutorily obligated to, and that is in a couple weeks. So you'll be getting those recommendations from us, and that will probably be, could potentially, depending on what the recommendations are, you'll see that, and it's generally every other year, although they do review them every year. So you might hear about it every year.
On that real quick.
Yeah.
Just today was, a bill was introduced to expand the commission.
Yep.
And and it's going to stop here first, and we'll probably then end up at government operations
Okay, perfect.
based on the last recommendation. It's just FYI.
And as a reminder, historically, the number of murders, homicides that occur every year in Vermont, roughly half of them, or just under half, are related to domestic violence. So if we could fix that problem, our murder rate would be cut in half, basically. So we're going to keep trying to do that, and great strides have been made recently. I think 2 years ago, every single recommendation was implemented. It wasn't always legislative work that made that happen. Sometimes it could happen outside of legislative work, but we're really proud of the work of that commission, and really excited about the report coming out in a couple of weeks.
Can I add one?
Yes.
That the majority of fatalities, domestic violence related fatalities, are caused by firearms.
Oh, yes.
Committed with
And
firearms.
just the presence of a firearm increases the lethality of a situation many times over. So yes, that is a good point. The other topic maybe I can envision coming in here is data privacy. We are data privacy experts just over the years, because it's a consumer concern, and so much of, long story short, so much of commerce now occurs online, and so much of that online commerce is fueled by data. So that might come up. So flagging it for you. We often are in economic development for that, but that is a topic that I've been working on for many years and I feel very strongly about. I'm trying to think if I've missed anything, but I think that that's a good overview. I told you about the Consumer Assistance Program. If you need to get in touch with us, Todd should be your person. And if you need to schedule me, Todd can work on doing that with the Outreach and Communications Coordinator, Amelia Vath. Any questions?
Questions? Barbara?
Well, I think, so Todd would be our person if we have a bill that we want to figure out if that's an expertise that would make sense to have about.
Yep. He should really be your go-to for whatever. Yeah. Because he'll be focused on the legislature. One of my concerns, especially with me, is that you'll text me and then I won't see it for like a day. As we know, the legislature moves very quickly. So so Todd should be your first step, I think.
And this isn't 100% related to judiciary, but your office was super helpful last time with the towing issues. And I'm just wondering if that's a priority for your office again this time.
We had a report, and I don't think I've gotten a lot of updates beyond the report.
Came late in session.
Okay.
And I think legislation was not able to
Move ahead. Yeah. Well, why don't you get with Todd and then we can, yeah.
Yes, Angela.
Just a question about the concurrent jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned, I guess, interest may not be the right word, interesting, but prosecuting violent crimes in particular. But how do you decide where the, who will, if it will be the Attorney General's office or the relevant state's attorney?
It's actually a very unusual system that we have. This is not how other states, or maybe like Maine or one other state, but normally it's not done this way. We have really good relationships with the state's attorney, so we often will have a conversation. And sometimes that conversation is actually just, wow, you have a really small office. It'll be in a county that where the office is really small. Like, can we second chair this? Do you want us to take this for you? Or why don't we show up and we'll do the case together? You'll see us doing cases with state's attorneys. Sometimes we aren't doing the case with the state's attorney. We literally will just go to court to be the other lawyer to say like, okay, what about this? What about that? You know, we're just supporting them that day. So it isn't really set in stone by any stretch. We're in communication with them very regularly. And we have very good relationships with them. But, you know, by and large, we have a more of a long view, I think, where the state's attorneys have a ton of charges that they're having to get through, you know, DUI, drug charges. We generally don't handle those. And so those are shorter, you know, they kind of, and they have to keep working on them, where we'll have, you know, a murder case. It's going to take us a long time and we'll dig deep and focus. So sometimes that's what we're kind of thinking of, or they might be like, this is too much for my office right now. Like, we need to keep doing all that other work. So it's sort of a dance, you know, it's not so clear, but yeah.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. There is not a set of criteria per se.
Right. That's right. We have really good relationships with the state's attorneys and work really hard to maintain those relationships, so that we can, you know, be collaborative and be a good teammate. So we'll continue to do that. My second term.
Any other questions? Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hope to see you sometime as we go along, although we'll lean on Todd.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jennifer, if you can join us, please. If you could introduce yourself for the record, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I was much happier to see the weather today than yesterday,
Yes, much nicer to get here.
especially when I got tricked into buying stupid me all-season tires instead of snow tires. The tire place said, these will be just as good. And cheap me was like, okay, sounds good.
Much or really.
For over 20 years. I've been laughed at quite a bit the last couple of days. Good morning, or good afternoon. For the record, my name is Jennifer Pullman. I am the Executive Director of the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services. It's great to see some old faces, and welcome to new folks. I look forward to working with you this session, this biennium. For my background, I'm a trained attorney. I got my start in Boston representing children and youth in abuse and neglect cases, status offense cases, and delinquency cases. And I did that for about 5 years and then moved to Vermont, and have been the Director of Sexual Abuse Prevention Programs at Prevent Child Abuse Vermont, Victim Advocate Coordinator for the state, Director of Public Policy for the center, and then the Director of the Vermont Children's Alliance, which oversees the child advocacy centers. And then I've been in my current job as the ED at the center for 3 years. The center's a little odd, and I think even for folks who've been and have heard me speak ad nauseum, I'm still trying to wrap your head around what our agency is. We are one of 5 what's called quasi-state agencies in Vermont, which means we were established as a state agency, but at the time, I understand Governor Dean didn't want to add more state employees to the state payroll. So we are a state agency, but not state employees. We consist of 18 staff, 2 of which, oh, I'm sorry.
No, not a question.
Oh, okay.
If I was just.
Oh, stretching your hands.
I'm ready though.
Okay. Well, that's good, because- And you have the sun on your back, so as long as you're not falling asleep, that's great. We have only 18 staff that perform a variety of functions, and we provide services and support for all victims across the entire spectrum, the criminal justice spectrum. I'm just going to try and do a bird's eye view of what we do. The funding piece, I'll speak to a little bit, but I really don't want to get into the weeds on that because it is pretty messy. And I know that this committee, which has been such a great friend to us in terms of supporting us, will bring us back for a more in-depth conversation. I'm mindful of the time. But as far as our programs, we have a couple of direct service programs. And the program that, we have the victims compensation program and sexual assault program. We have the restitution program. We have a grants program, a training program. We have a victim survivor advisory council, and then we have our advocacy piece, and you're looking at the program. Our victims compensation and restitution program are our 2 direct service programs. There where, if you have constituents who really need something tangible, that's really where they're going to come into contact with our program, with the center. Victims compensation program, I could be accused of bias, but I think it's one of the most important ways that Vermont can support victims and survivors in the aftermath of a crime. And I say that because we can provide up to $10,000 of support, and I'll explain that a little bit, to victims upon a finding of probable cause. So if a victim makes a report to law enforcement, the probable cause is found for a crime. Generally, it's a crime that involves of a personal nature. But if they find probable cause, then they can contact our program. We can work with them to begin to provide some level of support, reimbursement, or direct payment for a whole number of expenses. Generally, it's medical, mental health, but also lost wages, emergency housing, childcare, funeral expenses, crime scene cleanup, and a lot of those pieces that are just immediate needs that victim survivors have. And for the process, we will work directly with the victim survivor, and there will be there's some verification process. It's not simply they're filing and saying, I need this money. It is, we're verifying with a counselor, just getting a treatment plan. We don't need to have that conversation with a counselor or a doctor to say that they're crime-related expenses. And upon that, we can pretty much either reimburse the victim or in some cases make a direct payment on that victim's behalf. And that is not a cumbersome process. It's not dependent on prosecution. It's not dependent on conviction, only dependent on probable cause. We're really excited. We have a new aspect to the program, which is we've been working with an entity called ReloShare, because so many times our victims and survivors, often of domestic violence, are looking to have housing, for example, in a hotel, emergency housing. But any of us that check into a hotel know that you have to have a credit card and identification in order to be in that, have a room. So in working with ReloShare, we've identified a number of hotels that are willing to work with us and allow us to make that payment without the victim having to show a credit card or even give their actual name, which is a safety issue. So we're really excited to be able to offer that to victim survivors. So this is not something that they pay back to us. It's something that, again, is a $10,000 cap that they have. It is funded, not, sometimes we get that question, well, taxpayers, are they paying for it? No. This is funded with special fund dollars, which is either comes from a fee or fine that are on traffic tickets or on criminal convictions. Unfortunately, those funds are in decline and have been for over a decade for a variety of reasons. But we're really proud of our program. Other states require that the victim file within a year or only give the victim a couple of years in which to utilize their claim. But we recognize that trauma shows up in different ways at different times across the lifespan. And as long as they have not capped out their claim, we keep that claim open. So we are very proud to be distinct in that way. I'll talk briefly about this other program, our sexual assault program. It might be of interest to those of you, especially who are coming from jurisdictions that have colleges or a lot of college students. Our sexual assault program can provide some support for victims of sexual assault who present to a medical professional for a forensic exam. We can cover the cost of the forensic exam. We can cover the cost of STI treatment, post-exposure prophylaxis for victim survivors who are concerned that they may have been exposed to HIV. And we can cover up to 20 mental health counseling visits. We do not bill insurance, which is really important for many college students who are still on their parents' insurance and are worried that somehow this is going to get back to them. And we work, the network is, I don't know if Sarah and Charlie are going to speak to this, but they have such a huge role in running this sexual assault program. But we provide sort of that compensation component. So we work hand in glove with the network on that. Restitution, I want to talk briefly about as well. And you just flag me, Mr. Chair, if I'm going over. The restitution program, again, Vermont is unique in this regard. Just some context for how we got the program and how it's different from every other state in the country. Way back when, prior to 2005, restitution was under the auspices of the Department of Corrections. So they were responsible for collecting restitution. The collection took place, though, through a collection agency that would then reach out to those who had restitution obligations. They would in turn tack on a collections fee on top of what the person who owed restitution had to pay. The collection rate was approximately about 15%, and victims waited months, years, or never received anything. We also had at that time, the system allowed people to be reincarcerated for failure to pay. So it was not unheard of to have a number of people taking up bed space because they were unable to pay. So we decided as a state to do something very different and really turn the system on its head. It was removed from the corrections, and instead the state established the restitution unit that was operated with it by the Center for Crime Victim Services. And similar to the compensation fund, this is not paid for by taxpayer dollars. It is a 15% fine on top of traffic tickets and criminal convictions. So no general fund dollars are used at all, no taxpayer dollars are used. The program is different because once we have what's called a restitution judgment order from the court, so it's been litigated, the person's been found guilty, and either the court has made a specific finding or there's been an agreement as to what is ordered. For an individual victim, we can provide up to $5,000 of funds to satisfy that obligation. That doesn't mean that it goes away for the person who owes that money. We then continue to pursue that money being paid back. But for the victim, so many times we think about the cases that victims' compensation can't support. The housing fraud cases are devastating to what happens to folks. We can provide that $5,000 right away. It doesn't necessarily satisfy all that person is out, but you'd be surprised the vast majority of restitution judgment orders are under $5,000. So we're able to make that victim whole, and then we work with the person who's responsible to try and collect that money. And our collection rate is about 48%. So it's a significant increase because we have a whole host of tools that we can use. Lottery winnings, wage garnishment, liens, hunting and fishing license is a new one. And that one is proving very effective in terms of getting folks to pay. And we also work closely with diversion and restorative programs as well, so that we're making sure that they're really well trained, and we're not always dependent on that conviction. It's really just important that we make people whole and working with them on that. So we're really happy with that. And also we've removed that requirement, or not requirement, we've removed in statute that somebody can be incarcerated for failure to pay. And what we found is that it hasn't impacted our collection rates. It's these other tools that we were able to use. And obviously, I think I'm going to just go out on a limb. I think we can all agree we don't want that bed space being used because somebody could not pay. And we do not charge any interest. We do not have any additional fee for collection. That is simply how we operate. And, people are often not paying because they can't. And we understand that. And we work with folks and make referrals ourselves to working fields and other programs that exist to try and help somebody so that they can be in a place where they want to pay or are able to pay. Our grants program, I'll just quickly say, we have about 65 subgrantees throughout the state and administer over 267 separate grants. So if you have a question about what's happening in the state or in your county, we probably know in terms of victim services exactly what's happening. So it gives us this really great view of all the programs that are out there, the work that they're doing, what the intersection points are. There's a lot to be done in terms of how we do grants. We are accountable to you all and accountable to the feds who come and do lovely audits of us every few years. We just completed one that was a good time. But we are, we do site visits. We provide technical assistance to programs. We, have to look at every single budget that's submitted, approve all of those pieces. So there's a lot to that. I'll speak briefly about our council, our Victim Survivor Council. Really thrilled. This is one of my priorities. When I started this job 3 years ago, the center used to have one and it fell apart. And our council now consists of 6 victim survivors. We have to be very thoughtful about how we engage folks, because you certainly don't want to bring somebody on board who is still right in the middle of what they have experienced. So it's a really thoughtful process that we go through in terms of providing orientation and training, but they are involved in all aspects of what we do internally and externally. They look at everything that we do, every piece of correspondence that we send out, that our compensation program sends out. They look at our website. They look at what restitution is providing, and they provide training for our own staff. They also provide training for other programs. They are currently just about to start a 2-day training for the Department of Corrections staff, for the entire staff, on being trauma informed. So 2 survivors are doing that themselves. They sit on meetings and work groups and provide testimony. We just had our strategic plan yesterday that they were involved in helping to say, like, no, we don't like this, or you really need to do more of that. So we're really so grateful to them for helping to, literally advise us. We do training. We have our Victim Assistance Academy, Crime Victims' Rights Week, various trainings for the state's attorneys and their advocates, and training on our programs. And then, as I said, there's the public policy, and you're looking at it and you'll see me. And it's been an interesting journey all the years that I've done this, because I've done a variety of issues I never thought I would speak on. Last year, the biggest surprise was tree trespass. I never thought I would be speaking on the issue of trespassing by cutting down somebody else's trees, but you never know. You stick around long enough and there you have it. Just on the funding, like I said, I'm not going to get into the weeds on that. Just in terms of just an overview, as far as general fund dollars, the center, despite being a state agency, receives only about $100,000 in general fund dollars. That went up $84,000 last year. So prior to that, we were receiving less. When the General Assembly decided that we need an additional person to help us with our grants. And we finally found somebody as of today. So, but the rest of what we receive for general fund dollars, which is about $1.5 million, is a straight pass through. By straight pass through, I mean the center does not take any administrative funds to provide those. And those funds go to the network, the child advocacy centers, supervised visitation programs, and to fund some of the prosecutors at the state's attorney's office who work on the domestic and sexual violence cases. So that's all we get for general fund. As far as the special funds, there are 3. There's the comp special fund, which I already spoke about. There's the domestic and sexual violence fund that runs through the center. Again, that is a straight pass through. We do not take any administrative dollars off of that. And then there's the restitution, which again is that 15%. And I do want to note, and I don't know if Sarah and Charlie will speak to this, but again, the special fund dollars have been in decline for over a decade. This is not a surprise. There was a report provided in 2013, which said this is not sustainable. You can't do this. And despite the best efforts of the people at this table and people outside of this room, we haven't been able to make any significant changes. A lot of them have been one-time funds to support, and there have been a couple of attempted fixes based on recommendations from the Joint Fiscal Office that just haven't resulted in an increase. So all 3 of those funds are looking at a deficit this year. And again, I'll speak to that more when I come back. There's good reasons for those declines, and I raise them more because I think we have to really look at the sustainability of what we're doing, because I think there are good reasons for why there have been some changes. For example, as we've decriminalized some aspects of what's in our current code, that has resulted, like DLS, driving with license suspended. this committee noted last year, like that's a hit on our special funds. People are being pulled over less and less for very good reason. And that means less tickets. So that's not going to change. And in fact, we're probably going to keep going in that direction. So again, it's incumbent on all of us to think about how we do things. The federal grants are not looking much better. We've relied as a state on federal grants for a long time when living was high to support core services. We are about to lose 3 federal grants because that came in through the ARPA dollars. But most importantly, the main grant that we have relied on as a state, the Victims of Crime Act, or VOCA grant, is forecasted to have a 40% decrease for next year. We have gone from over $6 million several years ago to now we're looking at $1.9 million to fund the programs that we fund with VOCA, which are over 50 programs. So to date, unlike other states, we have not had to make any cuts because we've been very conservative. Some states with the big increase at one point were like, "Woo, let's spend it all." We saved it for rainy days. So we haven't had to make any cuts. But as you'll hear, either today or later on, we haven't been able to make any increases. There have been no cost of living adjustments. There have been, yes, we've level funded, but that's essentially a cut. And cases have only gotten more difficult, only gotten more challenging in terms of the levels of trauma that we're seeing, the levels of substance misuse and mental health challenges that are confronting the folks that do this work on a daily basis. So you'll hear more about that, and I'm not going to speak again to our ask or any of the other details. We have a couple of priorities, but I certainly don't need to get into those now in the interest of time.
Yeah, so this is looking not that far ahead when you think of it, but probably on Tuesday, February 4th, we're going to get into victim issues a little bit more deeply and have a hearing on that afternoon because I know that's the network is going to have, it's a network advocacy day, and we're going to kind of use that as a day to coincide with looking at possibly any victim rights bills that I know that you and Barbara have been talking about. So we'll and we'll talk more about the budget part as well. So we'll definitely dig deeper. And so we're going to hold questions until then on this particular issue. But thank you so much for the overview as always. And
Well,
there's so much that's involved.
Well, thank you for your patience and always available for questions, and I'm here enough, and certainly many of you have my contact information.
So, and you probably will be getting contacted to touch base on the juvenile justice. We're having 2 days of education and oversight next week, and hopefully you'll be able to just stop in and weigh in on that if you wish.
Of course.
I know that there's victim issues in the juvenile justice area that so we can touch base with.
Well, as my team knows, during session, I have no clue where I'm going to be or when I'm going to ever see you again. So I will definitely make time. Thank you. Thanks.
So I do know that that ACLU has a hard stop at 3, but I do want to get to Susanna first for introductions, and we're going to have Susanna in more than one time, or her people. But over to you, Susanna. And if you could introduce or identify yourself for the record first.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon. Buenas tardes. For the record, Susanna Davis, Executive Director of Racial Equity for the state of Vermont. Despite my history with this committee, I actually can tell you that I will not be long-winded today, and hopefully we can still get the ACLU in and out before 3. I will be brief. I know what you're thinking, but have faith in me. So I am actually joined by a colleague today. In the room with you is Angela Lasso Jimenez. She is our new policy and research analyst, and so you'll be seeing more of her this session. And I'll let her introduce herself as well if there is the opportunity today. So the Office of Racial Equity was created by an act of the legislature in 2018. I was first appointed in 2019. So we're going on, I suppose, 5.5, perhaps 6 years in the role. And our first 2 staff persons were added in 2021, which is when we officially became an office. The interactions that this committee will have with us most often is actually going to be through what is known as our Division of Racial Justice Statistics, or what we affectionately call the DRJS. I know that you all are familiar with it because it was actually through this committee that the bill moved that had it created. So just as background for anyone who may be new in the room or for any viewers watching, the DRJS is a smaller unit of the Office of Racial Equity, whose purpose is to collect, analyze, and report on data related to the justice system through a racial equity lens. The purpose is to identify disparities in the state of Vermont and to make recommendations on how to mitigate or eliminate those disparities. The charge is long, and the statutory authority given to the division to be able to do its work include things like permission to conduct rulemaking, permission to identify which data are necessary and which agencies or entities may have those data, and permission to solicit those data and acquire them either through the use of memoranda of understanding or through the provision that requires compliance with DRJS requests in order for law enforcement agencies to make use of Vermont Criminal Justice Council and Police Academy services. So we are also, as an office, the recipient of traffic stop data that all law enforcement agencies are required to report. The Agency of Administration is required each year to confirm whether those law enforcement agencies have provided their data so that it can be determined whether they'll have continued access to the services of the Criminal Justice Council. Because of this, you will also see us having parallel conversations in government operations to the extent that there may be overlap with law enforcement issues. That's the more specific area in which you'll hear from us the most. More broadly speaking, the Office of Racial Equity's purview is very broad. A lot of our colleagues in state government have committees of jurisdiction that are limited to 1 or 2. But because we know that injustice shows up in every aspect of our daily lives, we tend to be present in conversations about housing, employment, school safety, education, child development, health, you name it. There are a really, really very broad list of topics on which we are present. And so you'll often hear us discussing upstream factors when we talk to you about criminal legal matters. For example, for us, we see it as impossible to have a conversation about recidivism without talking about housing insecurity, just as one example. So we often try to find ties to other issues or social determinants that may be contributing to or driving some of the outcomes we're seeing on the criminal legal side. Some of the past work that we have consulted with you all as a committee on include things like electronic monitoring, the Judicial Nominating Board and updates to its statute. And let's see, what else have we been in on? Well, I suppose a lot of criminal legal stuff in general. I'll pause there and, of course, welcome any questions that you may have. Thank you for your time.
Well, that was quick, and there is a lot that we reach out to you about and will continue. And Jay Green did, they provided awesome testimony on several issues last year. They were not always satisfied with where we perhaps ended up, but we definitely want to hear and make sure that we're listening and taking into account the viewpoints that you're bringing to the table for us, especially and do want to at some point during the session dig more deeply into the data issues that have been identified by RDAP, for instance, and I'm sure by your office, and we will be planning on that. But any questions, any other questions for Susanna? Well, yes, I definitely want to jump over for further introductions, but for Susanna first, any questions for Susanna? Okay, well, we'll do introductions for you as well then, if you could identify yourself for the record and and give us yeah, sure. Yeah, please.
Used to it.
Yeah, right. Get used to it. Get used to the seat. The hot seat, actually, it's not.
So hello, hola, buenas tardes. My name is Angela, but I'm from Colombia, so my name is pronounced Angela. I just pronounce she, her, or ella. And I don't have anything else to say. I mean, Susana said it all. So I'm so happy to be here. I think I'll be here often, or my DRJ's colleagues will be testifying a lot. So I'm just very excited for the work of this upcoming legislative session. Yes.
So in next week, I don't know if it will be you or somebody else that will be reaching out, I think through we're supposed to reach out to. I'm looking over at Nate on the juvenile justice hearing that we're going to have for 2 days to just really educate ourselves on that issue and would welcome some input from your office on that as well. So you'll be seeing that invitation.
Yes.
We'll be seeing somebody, maybe perhaps you next week.
That was super quick. Yeah, very interesting.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Susanna.
Thank you
So
all.
Falco, if you could join us.
Right, yeah, it's good job. Yeah, I mean, we have till 3:15, so I really don't think we're gonna go that long, but if you really want to ask us lots of questions, happy to stay and chat with you all as much as you would like. I'm gonna start off by introducing myself and also introducing my colleague, Jordan, let him speak a little bit for himself. So, for the record, I'm Falco Schilling. I'm the advocacy director at the ACLU of Vermont. This is my 16th session in one form or another, wearing a number of different hats, sixth session with the ACLU. I grew up in southern Vermont in the village of Saxton's River. Went to Vermont Law School, and about halfway through my time there, was working with Legislative Council and just haven't really left since. Love working in this building, love the work that gets done here. And, some people, not everyone does, but I'm definitely one of those folks. So glad to be back, excited to be working with all of you. And I'll let Jordan introduce himself quickly, and then I'll dive in a little bit more tell you about our organization and just some of the lens that we are applying to the work as it relates to your committee, and then some of the things we're thinking about for the session.
Great. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Souter. I'm new policy advocate for the Vermont ACLU. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to meet you all. Quick background about me. I grew up in Virginia, received my double major in criminal justice and philosophy and law at Virginia Commonwealth University. Moved up to Vermont, fell in love with it, and attended Vermont Law School where I got my JD and focused my studies in restorative justice. Before coming to Vermont ACLU, I was a restorative practices facilitator at high school in Nashua, New Hampshire, and then became a youth and community program coordinator for the Orange County Restorative Justice Center in Chelsea. And now I'm just really glad to be here. This is my first session, and I'm just excited to be working with y'all. I'm sure you'll see a lot of me.
Yeah, Jordan, I of course love spending time with this committee, but one of my goals is that you'll be seeing more of Jordan than me this session, and we'll see how that turns out. So just a little bit of background about the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. The ACLU of Vermont is one of 53 affiliate chapters of the ACLU nationally. We were founded in 1967. And our mission is we work in the courts and in the State House to advance and defend the civil rights and civil liberties of everyone who calls this state home. We have been growing somewhat over the last couple of years, and we now, hopefully in the next, soon we'll be numbering at 15 folks working in our office. The reason we have to leave is we're going to be interviewing someone new at 3:30 and want to make sure we're back in time so that they don't think that we forgot about them. We have 3 folks who are going to be dedicated to policy advocacy, largely focused on the State House. We have someone new who's going to be starting on Monday, Alex Carambellis, who will be focusing on some issues more outside of your committee, but will probably be interacting in some ways. And then we have soon to be 4 staff attorneys whose work is more focused on the courts largely. And so, I am a lawyer by background, but I don't go to court, which I get to come be with you all, fine people, which I appreciate. The primary areas of our work, the mission and mandate of the ACLU is quite broad. But I think most of our work within the state has been focused within the judiciary committees as well as corrections and institutions. But we also focus quite a bit on things like government accountability, including accountability for law enforcement, voting rights, reproductive rights, privacy protections. We do work around housing and rights of people who are unhoused. So it's a very broad mandate, and we do our best to try and respond to all the requests that we get, though this place definitely keeps us on our toes. What folks have seen us on here in this committee most often and most recently have been issues related to our flagship campaign, which is the Smart Justice Vermont campaign. Launched 6 years ago, the overall goal of this campaign was to reduce Vermont's prison population by 50% from its peak back in 2008, and to combat the racial disparities that exist within our criminal legal system. Some of the good news, when you look at the reductions in the prison population, in 2008, we incarcerated approximately 2,200 people. And today we incarcerate, looking at the numbers literally today from the Department of Corrections, it's down to 1,429, dipped to as low as 1,225 at the height of the pandemic. One of the trends we are seeing there is we're seeing quite a high number of people who are being held pre-trial, which is something is a concern of ours, and I know is a concern of this committee, especially when you're looking at how do we keep that court backlog moving its way through and diminishing it, especially post-pandemic. So overall, we've seen about a 35% reduction in the number of people who are incarcerated by the state of Vermont since 2008. And I would say a lot of that work is thanks to what's been done in this building through processes like Justice Reinvestment 1 and Justice Reinvestment 2, which did a lot of work at trying to reduce incarcerative sentences for low-level crimes, as well as looking at the supervision structure that exists within the Department of Corrections, and instituted things like earn time, number of different factors. So wanted to note that, and really happy to see that trend moving forward, the work that's been done by this committee. When it comes to racial disparities, I have not as much good news to share, where we look at our system now, a Black person is 7 times more likely to be incarcerated in our system than a white person. Person of Hispanic background is about 4.5 times more likely to be incarcerated than a white person. But I will say one thing that actually made me feel pretty proud just a minute ago is seeing that the Office of Racial Justice Statistics is now getting up and running. That was one of my first bills I ever worked on when joining the ACLU, is working with folks on this committee to try and make sure that we were collecting that type of information to inform the policymaking that happens in this committee and across the building. So, sometimes seeing things like that, things move slowly in government, but seeing that progress and knowing that those folks are going to be helping to influence this conversation moving forward was heartening for me personally. And I think folks who've been on this committee for a while should be really proud of that work as well. Just in terms of the lens that we bring to our work and will be bringing to the conversations happening in this committee, as the ACLU, we are advocating that incarceration be used as a last resort, because incarceration is the greatest deprivation of liberty that a state can impose on anyone. So as we look, and beyond that, we look at some of the research around harsher criminal penalties and what that's done in terms of increasing our prison population here and throughout the United States. We have a much higher incarceration rate than many other civilized countries. But we also know from the research that, tough on crime approach often does not get the results that folks are looking for. And I'm happy, some of this might sound very familiar to folks who we had some hearings on public safety last year. And if we're diving into that again later, I can give you some more of the research. But high level, harsher penalties are not going to deter crimes. And then longer sentences can usually do not reduce recidivism, is what the research shows us. And so that's some of the perspective that we try and bring to this work as we look at proposals on the table that might be increasing, sentence lengths or criminal penalties in other ways. And another lens that we do want to bring to this is just the costs of incarceration, both on a human level and to communities, but in a very real sense as policymakers, the costs to the state of Vermont. It costs us about $95,000 a year to incarcerate someone, so about $260 a night for someone to be incarcerated by the state of Vermont. It costs approximately $8,000 a year to monitor people on community supervision. And then folks who are in out-of-state beds, it costs about $40,000 a year for those folks as well. So those are real costs that have a real impact on our resources and, something to consider as we look at new crimes and penalties. We also have concerns around the folks who are disproportionately within our criminal legal system. And often we see folks who have substance use disorder or folks with mental health conditions end up within incarceration at higher rates. And so outside of the jurisdiction of this committee, advocate for ways that we can work upstream to try and provide better prevention and supports and services. As I said before, we are doing work around housing because, as Susanna said, that's the type of systemic work that is required. And oftentimes you all in this committee are at the end of the line. So I can make my best pitch to you all, but sometimes it's going upstairs to human services or to other, across the hall, to housing, other places like that, where that can be most effective.
I'd like you to advocate there as much as possible to make our job easier.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Appreciate that.
So that's a high level overview of, some of the things that we are concerned about and thinking about. But looking to this coming year, we, as the ACLU of Vermont, we have disagreements with pretty much every single administration, both federally and state, and bring lawsuits against all of them in different ways. I will say that with a new incoming federal administration, we have a heightened level of concern about what some of the impacts might have that might be coming to the civil rights and civil liberties of people within the state of Vermont, based on our experience with the previous Trump administration and some of the rhetoric that we've heard on the campaign trail. And so as we look forward to this year, we are trying to put together proposals that can be helpful for folks who are thinking about how do we guard against either state or federal overreach. A lot of that work has already been done and has been done by places like this committee, where you all passed bills prohibiting the ICE arrests at courthouses, passed shield laws to protect people who are getting legally protected health care, whether it's abortion care or gender affirming care. But we're going to be monitoring that closely, and there is more that we can do in terms of trying to protect folks' privacy and sensitive information held by the state, how we can restrict access to the greatest extent possible. There is, of course, interplay between state and federal law. There's a supremacy clause, and full faith and credit clause, which do put limits on how much we can restrict certain activities, either by the federal government or other states. But trying to see what we can do to move things forward and be as protective of the civil rights and civil liberties of folks within this state. And also a higher level looking at some of the ways that we can stop folks from being put into the system, which can be harmful. So things like limiting unnecessary police interactions. We were in here last year on a bill to move some roadside enforcement to secondary enforcement. This is of a concern where we're already hearing calls to deputize local law enforcement to help support in immigration enforcement efforts, things like that. And where we also know we have pretty significant racial disparities within traffic stops and roadside enforcement as well. And, outside of this committee, we are going to be talking about things like making sure that we can fully fund healthcare services if we see threats from the federal government, things like access to abortion care and gender affirming care. I dropped off a very nice letter to you all in your mailboxes that outlined some of our higher level priorities. That was kind of an outline to you all for now. But, if you ever need anything, feel free to reach out to me, reach out to Jordan. We're happy to help support your work. Or if we don't have a position at that point in time, we're happy to let you know that as well. But really appreciate the work that you all do and your commitment, and want to thank you all very, very genuinely for your service to the state of Vermont. Being an elected official is not an easy job, and our democracy would not work without you doing it. So very genuinely want to thank you all for your service. And I think that's all I have to say for today.
Any questions? Yeah, go ahead, Ian.
The numbers you cited for incarcerated individuals going down a certain percentage, does that include people on hold without? Does that include people incarcerated outside of the state of Vermont, but Vermont still has authority over them?
Yeah, that includes folks who are incarcerated out of state. We used to incarcerate far, far more folks out of state than we do today. There's approximately 150 folks incarcerated in Mississippi. At this point in time, all those folks are men, and most of those folks are people with longer sentences, but who are not considered to be, I'm trying to remember the exact terminology, but are a lower security concern within the facility, though might have longer and more serious convictions, which require longer sentences.
And does it also include the numbers for people who are on hold for?
Yeah, so that includes all the detainees for whatever reason. And one thing that I appreciate, this is something we worked on the Department of Corrections, in the vein of data. When I first started, it was very difficult to find out how many people are incarcerated on a daily basis. Through the pandemic, this was a big concern due to the health risks of being incarcerated. You can now go to the Department of Corrections website every single day and see how many people are being incarcerated, in what facility, what their different statuses are, how many of those folks are federal detainees, how many folks are being. They don't have as much information on bail statuses in terms of hold without or.
Are you sure? I thought I'd seen a report that really explained the amount of bail and if it was hold without bail.
It's at least not part of the daily population report.
Yeah, I think
it's one of those things that I've seen some point in time counts.
Time stuff. You're right.
It comes out a little, but the daily count is largely high level. Who is it federal? Is it state? What facility? And so it's one of those things you can track pretty consistently over time. They also have a monthly demographic report that comes out in terms of different demographics of the incarcerated population, which can be really helpful to see some trends over time.
Include home detention and other types of detention outside of corrections.
I don't know if it includes the home detention program. When I last heard about that, there was about like 5 people.
Well, it's not just home detention, it's other people serving sentence outside.
I don't think
probation, you mean?
Yeah, I don't think it.
I'm like on furlough.
Yeah, no, it doesn't include furlough and does not.
Interesting.
Yeah, it doesn't include folks on furlough and other forms of community supervision. It's just how many folks are housed within
They're getting
facilities.
credit though, while they're on furlough, correct? So wouldn't they be under correction supervision?
They are.
Yeah, they are, but it's how many folks literally are who are
If
housed.
I look somebody up on there, I see them on a head count.
I mean, this is facility count, so that's how they're basing it. So it's how many folks are within each facility, and that's how they break it down. So it's like you can see each one, as opposed. I know DOC has those numbers and they bring them in because those numbers are much higher. I think approximately there's something like 8,000 folks under some form of community supervision at any point in time. I think I might be wrong on that, but that was my ballpark feeling. It's quite a bit more than the folks who are actually in within a facility.
One more follow-up. And trend wise, do you have numbers on what percentage of the people who are incarcerated currently in Vermont are held pre-sentence, or how many of them are serving sentences? And is that trend going a certain direction?
I've done some of that work. It's definitely that the numbers are at some of the highest levels that I have seen. So we're at about 459, I think, right now, which is pretty high. Even some of the numbers pre-pandemic. So the department posted out some like benchmarking pre-pandemic. I think it was around 300 more consistently pre-pandemic, and has recently been hovering closer to 450 or 500.
Thank you.
There's a lot to that number as well.
Yeah,
we'll be digging into.
It's a complicated number, but I think one that is of concern to a lot of folks.
Yeah, I mean, these are people who presumably should be priorities for court time to, since they are being incarcerated, and that affects how we can deal with the individuals who are being released because they really can't be held, which they shouldn't be held, and that's caused a high issue. Anyway, Karen, sorry.
You just said that. I was going to say,
What?
we have a plan, time that we're going to be talking about court backlog. And
Yes, yeah, and I was gonna just mention, and maybe you were here earlier when I mentioned the 23rd, that we're gonna have the public safety. I know we had you last time, I think.
Yeah.
And
I had the pleasure presenting to you all. Didn't make it into the Senate's hearing, so I appreciate the opportunity.
well, this will be joint with Senate, so they'll have to hear you too. The other thing is, do you want to weigh in when we take up the raise the age issue? I mean, we're doing education next week, which I wasn't going to bring you in for that, but the following week, we're going to look at the next step of raise the age presumption. It's happening April 1st, but we're going to be examining. Is that something you weigh in on?
We'll be tracking that so we can be in communication. I know Jordan's going to be monitoring your hearings.
Okay, if you can let me know, I won't put you on the agenda, but if you then want some time, just ask. Okay, any other questions? No, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
We will certainly be seeing you. Or Jordan?
See one of us.
So we are gonna save the best for last, of course, and I'm not gonna be presumptuous and say thank you for your patience, because I don't know how patient people are.
I was going to say that you can't underestimate my humility coming to you, being the one thing sitting between you and going home. So I'm trying. Oh, gosh.
People just get to go home after this? Okay.
I hope you do.
Yeah.
I hope you do.
Yes.
It's been a long week.
Well, God, we wanted you to stay here.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. For the record, Sarah Robinson. I'm co-executive director at the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence.
And congratulations again.
Thank you. My title change, yes. And I'm here with my colleague, Charlie Glisserman. So you're going to hear from both of us today. And we will try to keep it quite brief for you, and know that we'll be back here later in the session to speak with you about many, many topics. So just big picture, high level overview, the Vermont Network, we are a statewide nonprofit organization. We're the state's leading voice on issues related to domestic and sexual violence. We're also, the federal government designates domestic and sexual violence coalitions in all the states and territories. And we are Vermont's. And so we represent 15 direct services organizations across the state that provide support and advocacy to victims of domestic and sexual violence. And those 15 organizations together last year answered 23,000 hotline calls from Vermonters, provided in-person support to over 8,000 individuals, and also reached about 15,000 Vermonters through prevention education. So have quite a wide reach, and together they serve every square mile of our state. Our member organizations provide a range of services. It looks slightly different in various communities, but there are services that they all provide, and that includes confidential support. And I just want to make a quick note here that there are a lot of different kinds of victim advocates in Vermont. The victim advocates that work with our community-based domestic and sexual violence organizations are confidential victim advocates. They have a certain kind of confidentiality that's in state statute that's called crisis worker privilege. They maintain 24-hour access to services through a hotline and chat lines. They provide legal advocacy, so accompaniment to court. They will help survivors fill out court paperwork, let them know what their options are, and connect them directly to lower pro bono representation. Our member organizations provide emergency housing. Many of them operate shelters themselves or have other arrangements around emergency housing, transitional housing, and then we'll work with survivors, many of whom are fleeing, to find permanent affordable housing. And also provide a range of children's services and prevention education in schools, with faith communities, and lots of different settings. So in addition to the work of our member organizations, out of our office, we're in Waterbury, we're statewide. We operate a few direct services programs that work in conjunction with our member orgs that I wanted to just highlight for you all. We operate a small pro bono legal clinic and provide direct representation to victims of domestic and sexual violence, mostly around civil protection orders and in parentage and divorce cases. We operate DIVAs, which is a program that's located in the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility. About, a very, very high percentage, we like to say almost all of the women who live at the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility have themselves experienced some form of domestic or sexual violence at some point in their lives. And so the DIVAs program provides support and advocacy to incarcerated individuals there. We support DeVos, which is the Deaf Vermonters Advocacy Services. It provides specialized advocacy to people who are deaf, hard of hearing, or deaf-blind in Vermont. And they operate out of, actually, their offices are in Bradford at the old Austin School. We also train and certify a cadre of specially trained nurses, forensic nurses in Vermont. These are mostly emergency room nurses who provide forensic medical care to victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse. And we also maintain standards for and certify Vermont's domestic violence accountability programs, and those are treatment programs that individuals will participate in to change their behavior if they have been violent in an intimate partner relationship. So that's a very, very brief overview of who we are at the network. I gave you all a map. And so if you don't know who your member organization is who represents your district, that's a great way of finding out. And I would love to just hand it over to my colleague, Charlie, to tell you a little bit about a few high-level policy priorities that we're going to be speaking with you all about this session.
Good afternoon. My name is Charlie Glisserman. I'm trying to bring my chair in. I am the policy director at the Vermont Network. I'd like to briefly highlight 4 issues for you that are on this year's legislative agenda that may be of interest to your committee. The first is sustainable funding for domestic and sexual violence service providers. Members of the Vermont Network have largely been flat funded through Vermont's Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund for 15 years. As you heard from Jen, the fund's revenue sources see annual shortfalls. The Vermont legislature has had to make one-time appropriations for several years in a row just to keep the fund whole. With the increased need for services on top of inflationary pressures, this funding has really proved unsustainable. So we are seeking to establish a new and sustainable revenue source for the fund and seek other investments to meet the need for services. The next is a package to improve vehicle safety, protect survivors' access to vehicles, and update definitions of device-related stalking. So the principle behind this legislation is that as technology evolves, our laws also need to evolve with new safeguards to protect the safety and privacy for survivors. So this legislation includes protections against using GPS tracking apps that are paired with modern cars to facilitate stalking or harassment of a survivor. The second is a change to Vermont's domestic violence protection order statute to explicitly allow survivors to request possession of a vehicle as a form of relief. And lastly, updated definitions in Vermont's civil stalking protection order to better capture and protect against device-related stalking. Our third issue is protections for survivors of coerced debt. Coerced debt is when a person utilizes coercive control or identity theft to incur debt in the name of an individual. So this debt and resulting damage to a credit score can really have long-lasting consequences for a survivor and create barriers to housing, employment, and education. So states from Texas to Connecticut have passed financial protections, which basically establish a process for survivors to request that creditors cease collecting on coerced debt and also remove coerced debt from their credit report. So we are looking to similar legislation here in Vermont.
Can I ask you a question on that one?
Yeah.
Do you anticipate that that would be in this committee, or is that would be in Commerce?
It's my understanding that it would start in Commerce, but might come before the committee as well.
Stop by here. So is there somebody already have that bill in process and drafting it?
Yes. Representative Edie Granding has been doing great work on it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.
So last but not least, we are seeking to create 24-hour access to sexual assault protection orders. Sexual assault protection orders are a critical legal tool for survivors of sexual violence. And these court orders require a perpetrator to maintain physical distance from a survivor and other measures necessary for their safety. Currently, survivors can only request sexual assault protection orders during regular court business hours, which leaves them at risk when emergencies happen on evenings or weekends. And so we support creating 24-hour access to sexual assault protection orders so survivors have access to these protective measures when they need them. That is all we have planned for you today. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Angela.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Nice to see you all in here. The number 4, the one of the sexual assault protection orders,
Mhm.
do you anticipate that being requiring a legislative fix, or is that like talking to the courts? And sounds like a capacity issue, just not knowing what I'm talking about.
So, I think Sarah could perhaps speak to this a little bit, but it does require a change in statute that kind of defines the court process. It is not necessarily a capacity issue, is more that the process was defined in statute as confined to regular court business hours. This is one of those issues that might not impact a lot of people every year, but for the people that it impacts them very deeply. And so it, as we can expect, would not create a significant new burden on the judiciary. Is there anything you would add?
That is great. I will also just add that, I'm sure you'll hear more about this. There are 2 kinds of civil protection orders in Vermont. There is an abuse prevention order, and then there's a sexual assault stalking order. So we're talking about the sexual assault stalking order, but just the sexual assault piece of that. And we've been in good conversation with Judge Zone. He's fully supportive of moving to 24-hour access to sexual assault orders.
So I apologize. So if you haven't already talked to Tom Oliver about this.
I already submitted something on that.
And Judge Zone. So.
Did you read our mind?
He's good.
He's really.
Yes, yeah, he's ahead of all of us. Anyways, so, yeah, so I think so definitely I'll ask Tom to, when we have that draft bill, to
You can
get some input from you on it, so.
Or
Or you can do it. Any other questions? Other questions?
More something I agree on.
Thank you very
So,
much.
do you have any update now, or should we have at some point on what we passed this past biennium? Just to kind of would love to hear how it's going for coercive control, for the CJCs being able to handle. I don't know if you have any updates now, or if we want to do that some other
I can
time.
very briefly tell you, so last year the legislature expanded essentially the definition of abuse for the sake of an abuse prevention order to encapsulate coercive control. What we're hearing from advocates in the court is that that's working really well, and that it's more comprehensively really represents people's experience of abuse, that it's not just physical abuse that people experience, but it's a range of financial, emotional, psychological abuse. And that orders are being granted under those grounds, and we're generally hearing good things. And so I would say that we're still in a bit of a data collection process. It's not easy with the court's data to determine how many orders are being granted on the basis of coercive control versus the basis of, for example, physical violence. And so largely the feedback that we're getting right now is anecdotal from advocates that are working with survivors, but we're working towards some better data around that. And I would say that we're really excited about the work that the legislature did several years ago to allow very carefully and with an established framework, community justice centers to take cases related to domestic and sexual violence. We worked with the Attorney General's office to publish essentially some criteria that community justice centers would need to have a plan around. And that criteria was released July 1 of 2024. And we recently had the first community justice center submit and have an approved MOU through the Attorney General's office to do that. And that is the Greater Falls Community Justice Center in Bellows Falls, working with the Women's Freedom Center in Brattleboro. So we're really excited about that. And I'll also let you know that we were awarded a federal grant to expand access to restorative justice for victims of domestic and sexual violence. And that will be a partnership between the Essex Community Justice Center and the Burlington Community Justice Center. And so we're really excited about that as well.
Just, yeah.
It has started, and they're in a planning year right now.
I guess the last update was I forgot there's abuse of litigation. If you have any update on how that's going.
I think it's going well, though I will say I've heard both from the court perspective and from advocates that they're kind of seeing as those cases are coming in that there may be future tweaks that may be needed to that bill. And those are orders that were created by the legislature to prevent abusive partners from using the court system to accuse victims. And so we don't have any needed legislative changes this year, but I think you could anticipate that potentially next year we'll be coming back to you with some tweaks.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
I feel like it's working with you.
Yes, thank you.
Just a few kind of announcements for next week and a question for folks. So right now for next week on Tuesday at 1 o'clock, we're going to get a security briefing, which we'll get to go into executive session. So I'm very excited to have attention to go into executive session. And that's at 1 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon. And you've heard me say several times about Wednesday and Thursday that would be over at the pavilion. On Friday morning, we'll actually hear from Willa and others on restorative justice on pre-charge diversion, the bill that we passed this past year that we're going to get an update. Is that right? We're going to have that. Oh, I'm sorry. So, and then in the afternoon, we're going to start on a bill next Friday afternoon, H2, which will kind of follow from the Wednesday and Thursday because it has to do with delinquency. It's raising the age of delinquency to 12 from 10. Because we got 3 more bills and I'm already freaking out about getting bills out. So we'll actually jump into a bill next week. And I'm going to try to fit in those kind of smaller bills over the next few weeks. I mean, it hopefully won't be too disjointed that we will be looking at restorative justice for a couple of days and then we'll be doing the delinquency, which is not restorative justice, I'm sorry, but juvenile justice. But we will stick kind of with that topic. But if we have like a time frame, there are a couple of things like the Fatality Review Commission we heard about. We have kind of a narrow issue to deal with on that. But it's something that's a bill that's going to go to another committee. So I'm going to kind of want to try to figure out a time to fit that one in. So we'll be doing some of that. The one question I had for folks is if we should keep from 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon open for whatever you all want to do, including perhaps talking about retention, with some of the folks to let them know, or if you want me to, because Tom and I won't be here because we have chairs training, but we can go ahead, we can bring in like crime research group and we can
schedule the meeting then.
Okay, all right, schedule the meeting. So we'll just.
I mean, I don't know.
Well, no, but I guess, I don't know, let me hear from the rest of you. Do you want those free couple hours on Tuesday afternoon? Or would you like to hear from some more background? Because I don't think Tom and I need to hear from the crime research group necessarily, actually.
I don't.
But they have a big report and significant information that they can go over for us on criminal justice. But I also am happy to schedule that some other time. Any viewpoints on that? Ken?
I think you kept us too long enough.
I'm talking about Tuesday.
So make up today for Tuesday.
Oh, I see. You get free time on Tuesday afternoon because of.
Because obviously it's what you did all last year.
I did say that I would try for 3 and more likely 3:30. I did try that. I did say that.
We have cookies.
All right, so I won't schedule anything for Tuesday afternoon because Ken wants to do whatever he does.
Anyone can come to my.
It's called the real job.
So Ken can give us true opinion about this. We're gonna go on. No, all right, we're off. Phil, Tuesday at 1.